Welcome to Parent Talk Podcasts, where experienced parents and expert guests give tips and tricks on making parenting a breeze. Well, at least a little easier. Now here is your host, Geneviève Kyle, and co-host, Heather Fox.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the third season of Parent Talk, Everything Parenting and More. We are broadcasting out of the Greater Vancouver area. I'm your host, Geneviève Kyle, mom of two. I'm also the host of Les Parents Parlent, which is Parent Talk's French edition. I'm with my co-host, Heather Fox. Hi, Heather.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Heather Fox here, co-host of Parent Talk. I am also a mom of two and really happy to be here.
Thank you, Heather. And today we're talking about supporting your child through grief. And we have with us today Sonja Latifpour. Sonja is a social worker, a child psychotherapist, owner of Bright Star Counselling, and a mom of 4 children. Well, welcome back, Sonja. We're really happy to have you with us today.
I'm so happy to be back with the two of you.
Yeah. So, at some point or another, our child would experience losing a loved one. This may be a parent, a grandparent, a friend, or a pet. I mean, my first experience with grief was losing my hamster. So, what are some things a parent should know when explaining death to a child?
Your hamster. Often the first time children encounter death is actually through a pet. How did your hamster die?
My cat ate it.
Oh no. And what did your parents tell you?
Well, my mom explained to me the animal cycle, how...
the life and death cycle.
So I understood that.
Circle of life.
The circle of life. I was not too happy with my cat, I gotta say.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's developmental consideration when looking at death. So a 5-year-old, at age 5, usually children are able to understand the difference between the temporary separation and death, which is permanent. Between 5 and 11 years old, a child can understand the physical changes that brings death. So they're able to understand that the heart stops beating, they're no longer breathing. They're really able to understand the process of death on a physical level as well. But I mean, as we know, as adults, that death is a very abstract concept that we struggle with as grown-ups, and as children it's even more difficult to understand the complexities of grief. There's also a lot of values that we hold as adults around grief. So whether you're looking at it from a religious point of view, that it was time for God to take somebody back to heaven, or if it's a reincarnation, that the spirit comes back again in another body, everybody has their own view of death, and the child will learn about a death in a family through the values of a family, the values of death that the family holds. The thing is with children, when they don't understand, they make up parts of the story. So they have this thing, we call it magical thinking. So let's say they lost, their aunt died while they were at a birthday party. A child might no longer want to go to birthday parties because while they're at a birthday party, their aunt died. So the kind of the logical thinking goes, well, if I don't go to another birthday party, then no one else will die. So they put these logistical associations, yes, thank you, together to help them make sense of grief, which is something that adults and children both share, is trying to make sense of the loss and of the death. And probably one of the most important things to know about when children are grieving is children, rightly so, see the world through a me perspective. So they are inherently they want to know how death affects them. So who will drive them to their extracurricular activities? Who will drop them off at school? Who's going to sing them the special bedtime story at bedtime? So they really want to know how this affects their daily life. And underneath that all is who will take care of them, and is their caretaking affected in any way? And that's especially if someone very close, like a mother or father, dies.
Yeah. So what should we say to a child when there has been a death?
I think that one of the important things to remember, and I was just saying this before, is to give the information. Don't assume your child will know. As an example, what cremation is. When we tell them that the body will be cremated. I had a child in the clinic recently who was very upset because they thought that being cremated will hurt, because no one told them that when you are dead, you can't feel anything. So there's often little pieces of information missing for the child. So to be very specific, to say if their grandmother died, that they can't breathe anymore, that they don't feel any pain when they're in the coffin, or the idea of putting someone down on the ground, in the ground and putting dirt on them can be really traumatic for a child when they don't know that this person might be scared to be alone or scared to be put down into the earth. So there's a lot of explaining that needs to be done around death. So to be concrete is important as well. And even if you are explaining death through a religious point of view or value, I've heard death being explained to children as their younger sibling went to go sleep with the angels, or God called them to be by their side. It can be confusing for a child because they might assume, well, if God called my younger brother or sister, when is he going to call me? When is he going to call mom? And who is this person that it just can call whenever they want? So really being concrete about what it means for them to go through this loss. Obviously, the next question will be about what about mom and dad dying? And looking for promises that we all live forever. And that is really a process where you are supporting your child through that realization that we all die one day. And for a child to be 100 years old, that's a very, very, very long time for a child. And there is a reassurance in that most people live to be very, very old. And we have a long time together, and I'm always your mom and will take care of you, because they are looking for reassurance that right now they are okay and they're being taken care of.
So how do I know if my child is grieving? So what are some of the signs I could look for that my child is processing their feelings about the loss?
For younger children, you might initially see different behaviors. So you might see easier to cry, and not being able to be flexible with some things like sharing or saying goodbye to you as a parent. Separation anxiety often becomes something that they struggle with, and tears that will come in bursts. You'll see a child who is grieving playing, and then their play might turn into a type of play where someone is killed or someone is taken away, where they're dealing with the grief, and they're processing the grief and trying to understand what that grief means to them, and the fallout of that grief, and then they're finished with it, and then they'll go on and have a snack or do whatever else they were doing. And in this way, there's this built-in protection for children, where they visit the grief long enough for them to be able to work through it, and then they leave it again. So they'll revisit it often in different ways, whether it's through playing, through drawing a picture, through tears, through staying close to you. They will grieve in their own time, in their own developmental way.
So what can I do as a parent to help my child understand and cope with death?
So allowing your child to express their thoughts. So listening, really, there's listening, letting them talk. You will hear them really trying to tie together the practical side of death. So who will drive them to dance practice now? And then the emotional. So let's say grandpa always hid a chocolate for me in the car on his drive, and now grandpa can't do that, and I feel so sad. So it's really working through the practical ramifications of that loss, and with the emotions that go with that. But the children will learn how to accommodate the absence. So birthdays, milestones, they'll need extra support as they learn to go through a Christmas season or a birthday without that loved one with them. Teens, we know that teens are often don't get the support that they need because they are more capable and often are asked to take on more of the burden of a family as they transition to new routines. So really keep an eye on your teen as well. They are also grieving and will need the same amount of support, just in a different way. So letting your child talk and to listen. Grief is really a journey. It's not an end game. So grieving is really the process of making meaning out of the life of a death of a person. What did their life and their death mean?
Mm-hmm. So what do you do if your child doesn't want to talk?
You can have them draw a picture. You can share your own sadness. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that later, because there's two parts to showing your grief to your child as well. But really realizing that there is no right way to grieve. Every child has an inherent nature and personality where they will grief will look different for each child.
So not making them wrong for not wanting to talk and respecting where they're at.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So now, as a parent, if you're also grieving at that same time, is it okay to show that to your child, for them to see you cry or to be upset in front of them? And this hits home, actually, because my mom actually recently passed. My children, of course, are too young to be grieving her loss, but definitely for me, this is something that I find I've pushed my grief down. And because I had to focus on the kids. And I mean, my mom actually passed away 1 week after Madeline was born. So I had a newborn to take care of. It was kind of one of those crazy moments where it's the happiest moment and the saddest moment at the same time. So I felt like it's just kind of squashed down right now because I got to take care of my kids. So what's the advice there?
Yeah, your instinct is right. There's certainly that part. And when we go back to knowing how the child processes grief, it's really they need to know that they're secure, and security comes from the parents. So yes, certainly there's a part to that too, where grieving needs to be done in a way that kind of preserves that secure feeling that a child relies on for you. But yes, absolutely. The tears, the sadness, they are part of grief, and they are part of sadness and the process of integrating into a life where that person is no longer with us. I think the tricky part here is to remember the development of the child. And as a parent, you're their superhero, dragon slayer, monster crushing big hero. And when you're not okay, that can feel very, very scary. So even when you have tears, explaining that I was thinking about, let's say their father passed away, I was just thinking about Daddy and how he would have loved hearing that joke that you said. So that made me sad. And it's okay to be sad. I want you to know that I can be sad and be your mommy all in the same minute. So I'm going to wash my face and blow my nose and come read a book with you in a minute and make some dinner. So you're ending off in a caretaking activity.
Right. There was actually a moment a few months back. I was reading stories to Hudson, and then I was singing a song, and something did come up, a memory about my mom. And all of a sudden I found myself just bawling. And I scared Hudson because he didn't know all of a sudden what had happened, why I was crying. And then he started crying and hugging me so tight. And I mean, I composed myself and had it. Yeah, but it was just, I completely caught myself off guard, and it really scared him because he was about 2.5 at the time. And so it's kind of,
He was showing some great caring for you, though.
Yes, he
that
was.
very sweet.
Very empathetic of him to kind of, see how upset I was. And
Yeah, I mean, we often look at that as a child kind of taking care of us and how well they did in that circumstance. But important to realize that's not a sign of them being okay, but rather that those caretaking roles, we don't want to reverse them. Yet it's a tricky way because those tears were real and they came from a place of deep grief, and that's okay. And just to reaffirm that you can be sad and be his mummy and be superhero, monster crushing, awesome mom all at the same time. That then you're showing feelings and you're doing the caretaking.
Sonja, should we bring our child to funerals?
It's a good question. I'm asked that a lot. Again, there's no really right or wrong answer to this. If you do want to bring your child and you are deeply affected by this loss, by this person you are going to that you're grieving, great idea to have a support person for your child there. If you are not able to attend to your child's emotional needs during the funeral, to have someone there, really, really important for yourself and for your child. Your child might need some prep before they go there, what they're going to see, what's going to happen. So allowing your child to ask questions before the funeral and after, again, so they understand what was happening and having the ability to ask some questions so they don't make assumptions that are not correct or that they later on are concerned and worried about.
Mm-hmm. So at what age a child start understanding what is death?
So at 5, they're able to understand the difference between someone just sleeping and waking up and death being permanent. So that's kind of the rough age range and you'll see 6-7-year-olds will understand that we all die one day. And I'm sure as a parent, you know those times when you're maybe tucking your child in at night where they might ask you that, what happens? Will I die one day? Will you die one day? Probably parents with older kids remember that time very, very clearly when your child comes to the realization that we all die one day. And often there are some tears and some grief just around that. And when there's a death, they are forced into that quicker and more intensely.
Mm-hmm. So I know there's this normal way to grieve, but when do we, there's a step of grieving, when do we need to go for counseling? Because I'm just thinking, do you run to the counselor right away, or do you kind of wait a little bit? How do we do this? When should we go see a counselor?
Yeah, you're right. There's really no correct way of grieving, and grieving really is a process. As anniversaries come up, as important events come up, that grief is more intense. But there's something to be said about not pathologizing grief, so not making it a disorder, making it something that you necessarily do have to run to a counselor to. We talk about complex grief, and that's where when a child has maybe a strained relationship with a person that has passed away, or it is a death by suicide, or an overdose, a horrific accident, those events are more difficult because of the unexpectedness, because of the tragedy of it, because it was very unexpected. So that complicates grief a little bit. And for a child, can get stuck, so to say, on assumptions that they've made about the death. So either that it was their fault, that they had something to do with it, that complicates things. And that is where looking for someone, a psychologist or a counselor that can support the child through that. But there's a lot of things that you can do for your child. We talked about the kind of the connection piece. So you're going to want to put more notes in the lunch box, for example, to say, I love you, I'm thinking about you. Really some of the younger developmental things a child needs. So rocking, more playing, bedtime reading, bathing them, washing their hair, all those really primal caretaking activities that make a child feel safe because their feelings of sadness can feel very big and overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But things to look for, so if you're, I really don't like putting a timeline on it, but for the sake of giving some sort of idea, if after a year your child is having trouble with eating, not sleeping, a lot of conflict with friends, big feelings, cannot say goodbye to you at school, that might be a good time to check in with somebody to see if your child needs some professional help with their grief.
Mm-hmm. I have another question that comes to me as you're talking is, with little children, if there's any tragedy that happened, we may not say everything because they're too little. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking they can probably experience grief later on in their life because now they know more because they're older. So then counseling can be needed later again, or if it wasn't done when they were younger again, or then, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a process. So if you've lost your father as a child, that will mean something differently. It will have a different meaning when you are yourself become a parent, or you're getting married, or when other people rely traditionally on their father figure, and there's an emptiness that you feel that you've lost, even though it was maybe a long time ago. Absolutely, those are times there where you might want to have counseling even as you're older because of that loss.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Sonja. We can find Sonja on our panel of experts at ParentTalk.ca. Sonja, where else can we find you?
You can also find me at brightstarcounselling.com, and has all our information of our clinic.
Awesome.
I want to also add there's actually a charity in the Tri-Cities area. It's called the Charlene Reevely Foundation, and they are an amazing resource for families that need help paying for grief counseling, and they provide counseling sessions for families that have experienced a loss in their family.
Awesome. We'll add that link into our social media attached to this episode. So if you want to have that link, just go to our Facebook page or our Instagram page, and that link will be there. Well, thank you, Sonja, and thank you, Heather, for taking the time to be here and helping us be the best parents we can be. Don't forget, if you want to hear a little bit more about Heather and I, we are releasing some mini episodes called Real Mom Moments, where we talk about what's happening in our daily lives as moms. If you have a question or you would like to join us on our show as a guest or as an expert, please visit the Contact Us section on our website at ParentTalk.ca. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can always subscribe directly to this podcast on our website at ParentTalk.ca. If you enjoyed today's episode, we are inviting you to share it on your social media. As we all know, parenting can be hard.
Yes.
So it's important to remember to laugh, keep learning, cherish your village, and be true to yourself. Parent Talk is a safe space for everyone. Thank you for listening, and have a great week.
The views and/or opinions of the host and their guests are not necessarily those of Parent Talk and should not be considered as fact. The information offered is believed to be accurate but is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be used for diagnosing or treating any health issue or prescribing medication. If you have any questions or concerns regarding your physical or mental health or the health of your child, please seek assistance from a qualified healthcare practitioner.